Hello, I'm Pastor Jim Meyer. I'm a retired pastor in the ELCA, the Lutheran Church in America. In my collection in times long ago, I'd like to share with you the story entitled Throttle Out by James P. Meyer. And this is Margaret's story. The first time I ever drove a car was in 1927. My father owned a Whippet, which was a pretty classy car in those days. I slowly learned to drive it, and of course I was awkward at first and didn't know all the mechanics of the car. But as time went on, I became confident and then ventured out more and more. My grandmother wanted to encourage me and arranged for me to take her for a ride. I never turned down an opportunity to drive, so I told her, "Hop in." Well, the cars at that time had a throttle. This is a hard knob one pulled out to give the car more power and greater speed. The throttle was used for starting the car, first thing in the morning, those cold mornings, for going up hills, and for pulling a heavy load, or for racing. Anyway, I took my grandmother for a ride. We enjoyed the countryside together. We witnessed the fields and gullies, streams and hills. It was quite picturesque view. Somewhere on the way home we came to a hill, and I pulled the throttle out for more power to go up the hill. On the crest of the hill we could see our farm in the distance in the small valley below. The panoramic view was so beautiful. Over the hill we went, and down we came faster and faster. I couldn't understand why we were going so fast. Even my foot was off the accelerator. There was a bend in the road coming up, and I knew the brakes couldn't handle a foot stomping at this speed. So I took that curve, turning hard. Oh, my heart was in my mouth. I won't even tell you about grandmother. She just sat there with fright on her face. We made the curve, amazingly enough. Well, our property was coming up ahead. First, I took out the fence post, breaking the fence down, then dug ruts in the grass in the garden and careened into the front yard. Somehow I must have turned off the start switch because we came to a stop right in front of the front door. My grandmother shakily hopped out. So much for encouragement, eh? I think she was glad to be able to get out alive. My father came rushing up to us. He had a hot temper, and I was afraid it was going to get the best of us. But I guess he figured I'd had enough trouble for one day. We both thought I was lucky to have gotten by without doing any worse damage as we inspected the space between the front door and our car. I learned my lesson, which I never forgot as long as I drove that car. Throttle in. The end. I wonder about the excitement that Margaret had when she first drove the car and practiced afterwards. I wonder if grandmother felt safe in encouraging Margaret to take her for a drive. Have you ever encouraged your granddaughter or your children in doing something of a risk in life? I wonder how they felt seeing the pretty valley below and pinpointing their farm. I wonder what it was like to feel your brakes won't save you now. I wonder if you've ever forgotten the throttle knob. I wonder what father felt as he saw his daughter and mother careen through the fence and into the yard toward the house. I wonder if you've ever felt like grandmother when she got out of the car. I wonder why father didn't lose his temper. I wonder where you are in this story. And now our family room reflection. Since much time had been lost and sailing was now dangerous, because even the fast had already gone by, Paul advised them, "Sirs, we can see that the voyage will be in danger and much heavy loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Since the harbor was not suitable for spending the winter, the majority was in favor of putting to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, where they could spend the winter. It was a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest. When a moderate south wind began to blow, they thought they could achieve their purpose. So they weighed anchor and began to sail past Crete, close to the shore. But soon a violent wind, called the nor'easter, rushed down from Crete. Since the ship was caught and could not be turned head on into the wind, we gave way to it and were driven. By running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After hoisting it up, they took measures to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they'd run onto the Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor, and so were driven. We were pounded by the storm so violently that on the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard, and on the third day with their own hands they threw the ship's tackle overboard. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest raged, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and thereby avoided this damage and loss. I urge you now to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For last night there stood by me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before the emperor. And indeed, God has granted safety to all those who are sailing with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we will have to run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, as we were drifting across the Sea of Adria, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took soundings and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took soundings again and found 15 fathoms. Fearing that we might run onto the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. But when the sailors tried to escape from the ship and had lowered the boat into the sea on the pretext of putting out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurions and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the boat and set it adrift. Just before daybreak, Paul urged all of them to take some food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you've been in suspense and remaining without food, having eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will help you survive. For none of you will lose a hair from your heads.' After he had said this, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then all of them were encouraged and took food for themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. After they had satisfied their hunger, they lightened the ship by throwing the wheat into the sea. In the morning they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned to run the ship ashore, if they could. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea. At the same time they loosened the ropes that tied the steering oars. Then, hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But, striking a reef, they ran the ship aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none might swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and for the rest to follow, some on planks and others on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. From Acts chapter 27, verses 9 through 44. And here's our recollections. An angel of the Lord told Paul no one would be lost in the storm, but only the ship. Every day for a week the winds howled and tossed the ship, and every day they had to throw things overboard so as not to be swamped. But they prevailed. Careening down the hill in the car, Margaret saw the curve. Brakes wouldn't help, and around that curve they flew with hearts in their mouths, and the car stayed true to the road. Some of the crew were about to bail out, but Paul told them that if they did, all would perish. So the centurion cut the lifeboat adrift. All must stay with the ship until it ran aground. How easy it is for us to bail when the going gets tough. Have you ever heard the expression, when the going gets tough, the tough get going? The ship did run onto the rocks, and none were lost, just as the Lord had told Paul through his messenger. Margaret and her grandmother ran through the fence, running up the garden, and stopped abruptly inches from the front door. The Lord prevailed in his love, and all were saved. Where are you in these stories?